أخوي بكرة راح يكون منيح بكرة الشمس تشرق والكمامية والعالم جديد منور يلا فوت النوم حبيبي فوت النوم أخوي بكرة راح يكون منيح بكرة الشمس تشرق والكمامية والعالم جديد منور
All right. Hello. Can people see me? And Yochai?
I can see you.
I can see you. And I can see all of you too. Shavua Tov, everybody. In Chicago, it is dark. And I'm assuming in New York, where you are, it is darker.
It is.
So it's very nice to be with all of you. For what I hope tonight will feel mostly like an intimate conversation with myself, with Yochai, who is one of the co-creators of Israel Story, Sipur Israeli, which you'll hear more about tonight, and also with a TV star, and so we'll say more about that also in a little bit. If you haven't already had the chance to drop into the chat who you are, where you are, we have people here from across the country as usual, and also from across the city of Chicago. And also, like, if you know somebody as you scroll through and want to drop them a little hello, wonderful. And if you're scrolling through and you're like, wow, I don't know anybody, what a great time to introduce yourself in the chat, so that by the end of this conversation, I guarantee you'll walk away with like a few people who then every time you show up at services or at anything, will welcome you with friendly love.
I love how lively the chat is here. It's amazing.
We take our chat very seriously at Mishkan. We don't mess around with the chat. And thank you. I love, Jessica just did something that I was actually going to suggest, which is if you came tonight because you are like a diehard fan of this show, Fauda, and maybe you saw in Facebook, I posted a couple weeks ago, we're going to have the opportunity to interview this person from the show, and what do you want to ask him? And there was like a whole lively discussion because there are a bunch of people who are fans of the show. Great. I'd be curious to know if that's what brought you. Are you fans of Israel Story, the podcast? Is that what brought you out tonight? Or did you just see that Mishkan was doing a program on a Saturday night and you were like, I got nothing better to do? Or maybe you did have something better to do and you canceled it to come here. All of that, wonderful. And welcome. And I'm very curious, and we're going to be asking you later for your own questions, ideas, in response to the conversation we have. So even beginning now with like, is there anything you came wondering about or curious about? All of that is fair game. So it is Saturday night. It is the end of a week that was a very intense week. It would have been an intense week on the calendar in any case, even if what's happening in our country wasn't going on. This past week, it was Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut. And that's actually why we timed this event for this weekend. We really wanted to sort of have this conversation in dialogue with the calendar and with the themes of Israeli independence and 73 years and the diversity of the country and the challenges. And, you'll see some of that comes up in our conversation, and some of it, interestingly, doesn't come up in the conversation, and we can pick up on some of that together. So I hope you brought your Havdalah stuff. Oh, you did? Yochai, do you want to say anything before we go into Havdalah?
I mean, I have my Havdalah stuff.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Great. It's not every day you invite somebody to, be a guest in the community and you say, can you bring Havdalah stuff? And they're like, check, So I'm going to turn out my lights, make it a little more dramatic. And feel free, if you have a Havdalah candle, if you brought Havdalah stuff, but especially a candle, and we see you with that candle in your screen, we may include you on the screen. We may jump to screens that have candles. So, oh, hey. So feel free to be conspicuous and also safe with your candle.
See,
All right. So as we go into Havdalah, this one particular line, sort of funny. I had chosen this line from among all of the lines of Havdalah to do a song for before we begin. La Yehudim hayita ora v'simcha v'sason v'ikar kein tieh lanu. And I asked Yochai, you like grew up religious. Do you have anything you want to say about Havdalah before we go into Havdalah? And he goes, there's this line that always really bothered me in the ceremony. La Yehudim hayita ora v'simcha v'sason v'ikar. This line that I was thinking, what a beautiful line to sing for the Jews, for all of us. May there be light and joy and gladness. And he said, right. That line comes from the Megillah, right after we slaughter 75,000 people, right? Like that should make us uncomfortable.
Yeah, the context changes everything, right? The line is beautiful.
Changes it. So say more.
We just got to, basically the line comes right after Achashverosh, the Jews in the Megillah, they come up to him and they ask him, it was really fun that you let us slaughter whoever we wanted for one day. Can we please do it for another day or 2 or 3 days? And he said, all right, in Shushan, you can do that. And then that's what's called Shushan Pirim. You can have another few days of slaughtering. And then it says, so that's
And so you said basically, Rabbi, how do I make sense of this? And did I say anything that set your mind at ease?
Yeah, well, I never thought of it because literally I would almost mumble that sentence or skip it sometimes because I felt uncomfortable. And you gave me this explanation that I've never heard before and that I really liked, which is I changed my whole thinking about the Megillah, which is basically that this is like a parody. It shouldn't be taken as something real. It's more like a dark comedy. So in a time where Jews were I'm giving your explanation here. This is not my ideas here. That basically in a time when Jews had no power, definitely weren't going around exerting power on anybody else. This was sort of like a fantasy play, essentially, where they got to imagine themselves, in the other side, the powerful side, and it was kind of like a funny little thought experiment and imagination, basically.
Right. And that now when we say this, knowing that, I think one of the reasons why this line probably made you uncomfortable is because we don't live in those ancient times anymore when Jews have to imagine having power. Yeah. We don't have to imagine it. We live in that world.
Yeah, I took it literally.
Right. And so La Yehudim hayita ora, I said whenever I do this, I'm invariably in the room with Jews and non-Jews. I'm doing this ceremony, maybe it's with my family, but maybe it's at a bar mitzvah or a wedding. And it's not just Jews in the room. It's whoever our people are, and our people are diverse and they're Jews and they're also not. And that's part of the shining of this light with all of the wicks and all of the candle, all of the light. It's not just for us. Kein tieh lanu is not just for us. Let it start here, but let it emanate out, let it radiate out. So here we go. La Yehudim hayta ora ושמחה וששון ויקר ליהודים הייתה אורה ושמחה וששון ויקר כוס ישועות אשא ובשם אדוני אקרא. I don't have my usual team of harmonizers over here. Aaliyah's visiting friends in Atlanta. She's visiting Rabbi Lauren this weekend, and who knows what Henry's doing, but he's not here. So it's just me. No harmony. Hope it'll be okay. You'll have to make harmony from where you are. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen amen. Because everybody's holding candles, we're just going to go from one blessing to the next. So hold up your besamim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei v'samim borei minei v'samim amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei meorei ha'esh borei meorei ha'esh amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavdil ben kodesh lechol ben or lechoshech ben Yisrael ve'amim ben yom hashvi l'sheshat yamei hamaseh. Baruch atah Adonai hamavdil ben kodesh lechol amen. So feel free to take your wine, and if you're putting a candle out in wine, unmute yourself first if you can. It's such a good sizzle.
So. Gonna turn the light on.
Mm-hmm. Shavua tov.
Shavua tov. That was beautiful.
Yochai, when I read that you've built many eco houses and that you built the first organic co-op in Tel Aviv, I thought, Yochai doesn't realize it, but he's a Mishkan person.
Yeah, I feel at home.
So, Yasher koach, everybody. Thank you all of you who held candles for like 10 minutes. Um, so I want to give Yochai the opportunity to say a little bit about himself and about Israel Story, this podcast. If you've never heard it, it is compared to This American Life, which is sort of it like almost needs no introduction, but also it was modeled off of This American Life. It's not an accident that people
Yeah.
compare it, right?
We shamelessly copied the format and brought it to Israel because in Israel, whoever knows radio in Israel, it's basically people yelling at each other and trying to out-shout each other. And we wanted to, bring radio that sounded a little different. And we were big admirers of Ira Glass's work. And yeah, we got their permission, we got their blessing, I should say.
So tell us a little bit more about your ethos, about the Israel Story ethos, what you're trying to do, and then maybe that can sort of thread us up till this moment where it is that you reached out to, to us and said, do you want to put
Sure,
together a program?
sure. Maybe I'll do it in a sort of a little story, if that's okay. Israel Story is a podcast and a radio show in Hebrew and in English, Sipur Israeli and Israel Story. They're two separate shows. But a little story to sort of maybe demonstrate why we do what we do, and sort of why we do it is actually like from the moment when I sort of realized that myself, to be honest. It was one of the first stories that we did, and Mishi and myself, Mishi Harman is my really good childhood friend and also the co-founder of the show. We started it together. And one of the first stories we did was this amazing story about an ultra-Orthodox woman who had a Down's syndrome child. And this sort of prompted her to start adopting more kids with Down syndrome. And we went to meet her in Tzfat, where she moved to Tzfat from Alaska. And we drove up there, and in the car, I really remember this vividly. In the car, right before we were going to walk into her very small, dilapidated apartment, they're very, very poor, and it's kind of like council housing, or we were really tense because we didn't know exactly what to do. So we were debating whether we were dressed okay, should we change clothes, and then we had a 5-minute discussion about how we introduce ourselves and what do we do. Like, do we put out our hand, or do we just kind of try and gauge according to what she does? It was very awkward for us. We just weren't really sure.
And to be clear, the putting out your hand, why wouldn't you shake her hand, was because you were men and she was female and you didn't know whether she might shake your hand?
Exactly, yeah. So we didn't know if she was a shomer negiah, if she doesn't touch other men or not, or what is the situation there. We were very, very tense. And we went in, and it was an amazing interview. We spent about half a day talking to her. And we met this incredibly loving and very, very open-minded woman who said things that we never expected. She said, following her experience with kids with special needs, she would never turn anybody away from her Shabbat table, whether they were Jewish or not Jewish, or gay or straight, things that we really didn't expect an ultra-Orthodox lady to say. And when we finished the interview, which was really an amazing interview, we were hugging. We literally hugged her goodbye. And none of us thought that would happen, but it just felt appropriate to both of us, I guess, because when somebody tells you a story and really opens up, it forms a very quick connection. And we actually are friends with Chaya to this day. And I think that experience sort of really exhibited to myself. I thought that I grew up in Israel. I'm Israeli. I spent also many years in the army as an officer. I thought I really knew the country very, very well. And all of a sudden in that experience, I realized how much I didn't know my own country and how stuck I was in my own, to be honest, liberal Tel Avivi bubble. Those are the people I know. That's the Israel I actually knew. And you leave my bubble an hour and a half out, and there's this whole other Israel that I don't really know. And so really, for me, that's what Israel Story was about, to get to know my own country. And I think that's also what, at least I'm trying to do to the listener as well, is to bring amazing stories of amazing people and amazing individuals that you wouldn't be able to meet in any other way, because they're not sensational news stories, but they are absolutely incredible and inspiring human interest stories. And the sort of the overall aim is to really to try and complicate things in all directions. So often the conversation about Israel is very dichotomic, if that's a word. I don't know. It's like either
Dichotomous, right? Very like two-sided.
Two-sided, exactly. So either people are really like against Israel or they're very for Israel. Usually it's focused on Israel as this beacon of startup nations and US speakeas and cherry tomatoes and inventions, etc. Or else it's in Israel of politics and war and Iranian bombs, etc., etc. And it's not that those things are not true. They're kind of both true, but we wanted to complicate things and bring a whole other facet of Israel that we thought was much more interesting and important and nuanced. So that's what we try and do in a nutshell, I guess.
Great. Would you tell us, like, what is your listenership at this point? So I read that you went from the first episode, which had 11 downloads in like 2011.
Yeah, so this started, it's amazing, but we're already 10 years in the storytelling journey. And it started off as none of us came from radio. We all came from different backgrounds. We were childhood friends, and we just had this kind of idea, and we just went for it. And the first episodes were listened just by family and friends, really, which is what we expected. And somehow we got picked up by Galei Tzahal, which is sort of one of the big radio stations in Israel. And later on, we also started the English feed. So today we have about 150,000 listeners per month. Depends how you count the episodes, etc. And we have listenership from all over the world. Our English podcast is mainly in North America, but we have big pockets of listenership really all over the world. Okay. Interesting, lately I just found out that we have like about almost 2,000 monthly listeners in Iran. I'm not sure what that's about, but it's interesting. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that sounds like there is an Israel story to be told about listening to the Israel story in Iran.
Or else the Mukhabarat there is, thinks that we have some insights as well. I don't know.
So, all right, we want to get to this interview that we did with Ala Dakka. And so we have a reel of this actor. Do you want to say how he ended up, how this actor, of all, I don't know how many Arab Israeli actors there are on the scene, but this show Fauda kind of took the world by storm a few years ago. Tell us a little bit about how you ended up in a relationship in an interviewee relationship with Ala, such that we can.
I just want to relate to this comment that
yes.
Someone's Soraya. Soraya is that an Iranian American, and maybe some of the listeners are your family. That would be amazing.
That would be amazing.
So Ala, we met Ala. So Israel Story pre-COVID. One of the ways we fund our podcast, of course, which is free to all of you guys to listen. I'll also put a link down there for you guys if you want to subscribe and listen. So
we can send a follow-up email too.
Yeah, great. So pre-COVID, we would do these live shows, which are kind of like variety shows where we would do live storytelling, but it would also be with live musicians and all kinds of like live dancers and animation and different things were going on. So one of the things that we did is we took an amazing story by somebody we work with called Daniel Estrin, he's actually the NPR correspondent in Jerusalem. And it was a beautiful love story between a Jewish Israeli guy from Jerusalem and a Muslim Palestinian guy from Ramallah. And we took that piece and we gave it to an Israeli Broadway musical composer and director, Or Matias, and he turned that story into an amazing sort of mini Broadway musical in 2 parts. And Ala, we were looking for an Arab Israeli actor and singer that would tour the US with us in a show that was called, it was a Valentine's Day show, so it was called Love Revisited or Israel in Love, I can't exactly remember. And we took Ala, so that's how we met Ala. And he came with us on the show and we became really good friends since. And this is sort of before Ala was a star. He was just an actor in Be'er Sheva Theater. So yeah.
Wow. So we're gonna show his reel, which is like, basically what he sends for, to get interviews or something, or to get auditions. But
Yeah.
it shows some of the work that he's done, which you'll see both includes Hebrew speaking and Arabic speaking parts.
Mhm.
And we mostly just wanted to show oh, okay, great. So Jacqueline's seen him in other things. He sort of popped right when with Fauda. He became like an internationally
Yeah.
recognized face, right? Oh, did you
I'd say
freeze?
that was like his entrance into the big league. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So so let's play the reel, and then if there's anything else to say about Fauda before we play on the interview, we will. But let's meet Ala.
Hello.
היית בלוויה?
איך אני יכול לראות את הפרצוף לי שם? מה אני אגיד לאמא שלו? פעם האמנתי שזה אפשרי, שזה תלוי בבני אדם. תגידי לי את, אם הוא היה יהודי, היו הורגים אותו?
الثورة الكبرى تحرير فلسطين وحكي 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 فاكر إسرائيليين رايحين يجي حشرناهم يساوي
تتفكر الإشي الصحن طول هم إذا بيجوا؟
هم قتلوا أولادي كنا نقتل بالكفار يوم وليل مرات يمرق أسبوع كامل بدون ما ننام استحيش دمك؟ لا بدل ما تقرا بالقرآن الشرايد الكفار عايش ببيت فخم ولابس بدلات وبتاكل مطاعم وجاي تحكمني أنا؟ مين أنت تحكمني أنا؟ بطلت تشوف علشان هيك أنا انبعثت لهون علشان أساعدك علشان أساعدك تشوف طب خليني أساعدك
יודעת שאת יכולה להתלונן עליו? מה שהיה ביניכם בלילה זה הטרדה מינית.
מה בדיוק אתה רוצה שאני אתלונן? זה היה בהסכמה.
אין הסכמה ביחסי מרות.
די, עזוב אותי שלך, בסדר. באמת.
ירן, אם הייתה מגיעה אליך למחר, ואומרת לך שהיא נשארה לעבוד כל הלילה עם הבוס שלה ושהוא שכב איתה, לא היית אומרת לה להתלונן עליו?
תעזוב אותי כבר. זה היה ביוזמתי, סבבה? די, אין לי כוח, עזוב אותי.
نسيت تروحي على البيت إنه أنا دايما بحس كده مشتاق للبيت
אתם שם ועזה כאן, כמו הרוח רפאים שלכם, של כולנו. זה אף פעם לא באמת מתחיל, אף פעם לא באמת נגמר. לופ אינסופי.
הלך עלינו
All right. Do we have anything we want to say by way of introducing our conversation with Allah?
I mean, I think we can let him speak. I guess, but yeah, maybe we'll let him speak and then we'll talk after.
Great. Yeah. What you're all going to see is, so Yochai and I, we couldn't get Allah for this conversation with us at an hour when we could all be there and he could join us at an hour that
It
was
is
like,
the middle of the night in Israel.
yeah, it's like the middle of the night where he is. He's actually, where does he? Oh, he lives in Tel Aviv. So we recorded the conversation a few weeks ago, and what we'll do is we'll hit play on it, and you'll see he's got some very unique perspectives born of his very unique life. And if as he's speaking and if as we're in a conversation, you have questions, that occur to you, type them in the chat. You don't even have to like post them in the moment. You could just sort of type them and collect them. And then afterward, the conversation we'll have will be like debriefing a little and chatting, both about what comes up for us, what maybe was confusing, what we want to explore more. And So just collect your questions, and that's how we'll jump into conversation. Um,
Yeah, so I
and
mean, me
yeah,
and Ala have become really good friends since then. So I've had we've had long conversations over the years. So I'll do my best to answer any questions that you have, like Ala, if I know, and if I don't know, I'll say I don't know, and I'm happy to also, relay the questions and get back to you.
great. Yeah, and people who are in our Facebook group should know that many of the questions that you had, I actually transmitted. I asked. And we spoke for just under an hour, and then we distilled that down to about 25 minutes. So that's what we're going to push play on now, and see you on the other side of it. Oh, I should say before you hit play, if you are finding that it is glitchy, like if it's a 25-minute video, it might be glitchy on your end. If necessary, we'll put a link to where you can see it on YouTube. It's like a hidden link on YouTube in the chat. But it would be better if we could all hang out and watch it together. So just put in the chat if it's glitchy and you want an alternative. Let us know.
Yeah, should we start?
Yeah.
Hi everybody. Hi Ala.
Hi.
Good to see you. I miss you, man.
I missed you,
It's
man.
been a long time. I haven't been in Israel for a while. I mean, I know that you sort of grew up in a Muslim Arab family in Beersheba, but your parents actually put a big emphasis on Hebrew growing up, right?
Yeah, they put a big emphasis on Hebrew. I think they wanted to get improved with their Hebrew, so they try to speak with us Hebrew at home. We grew up as a native Hebrew speakers instead of native Arabic speakers, and it's sort of like, I don't want to say you call it coincidence. I don't think it's like sort of several needs that each of us had, like my family, my parents, and me, and my sisters, because we grew up in a Jewish community, and I think they knew that they didn't want us to get to be like at home, separated culturally from the school.
When you for many of your parts, you play actually Palestinian or an Egyptian or different Arab parts. Mainly, those
Mhm.
are the parts you tend to play. So how did you actually have to like work on your Arabic?
Exactly. That's what I had to do. I had no other option, but I think, and recently I'm figuring out that I had some sort of, because I grew up in a Jewish community and I spoke Hebrew, and my whole Palestinian Arab part of me was some sort of put aside in order to be able to communicate with people I grew up with, or to be, when you're a kid, you want to be like everybody else. And so when I grew up, and I figured out that in order to do what I love to do, I need to go back to my resources and to learn where I came from. And that's what I loved. I mean, I think when I figured that, when I found acting, which I found very late, like I didn't know I'm going to be an actor till I went to an acting studio. And when I went to the acting studio, and I realized that if I want to work, something in my look and something in my appearance, something, well, mostly in my name, Allah, mostly in my name would say that this is a native Arabic speaker. And so I had to learn Arabic. And the more I learned, the more I figured out it was always in my system. It's just some sort of, I put it aside in order to get to be more like everybody else in school. And I had to work on it. I had to work on it hard. I didn't know how to read. I didn't know how to write. I was sent. I mean, people would send me scripts, and I couldn't read it. When you first get the script, all the actors are joining in the table and read the script, and we try it, and the director just want to change several things. I couldn't do it because I needed to. I worked really hard on what was written in the paper. I mean, in the paper they gave me, and every change needs me to get home and sit on it and work on that change. So
I mean, you mentioned in your answer just now that speaking Hebrew both at home and you grew up in Beersheba and you went to a predominantly Jewish school. And basically speaking Hebrew and getting on the very regular Israeli accent which you have was a way of fitting in.
mhm.
How did that work? Like, was it successful? fitting in? Did you feel like you were an outsider, or?
It was too successful. It was so successful. I couldn't find my way out. It was. I fell in love with the whole culture because what happened to me is that I today looking at it backwards, sitting every time we do the interviews, we ask questions and we talk about things, but every time we do it, things change and I think about it and I think about things more deeply. And today I think that I mean I improved my acting skills because I had to learn a culture that I didn't grow up in, and I learned it and loved it. And till today, like my first language till today would be I can say it without a doubt. It's Hebrew. It's what I speak most of the time. Today I have, of course, a lot of friends that speak Arabic fluently, and I have more time to speak with them, and I'm improving my Arabic every time a little bit more. And it it captures a different place in my soul. Like it captures a place in my soul with time. And I feel like the Hebrew language, as I grow up, I figure out the friendship I have with this language and culture, and the writers. I'm an actor, and actors really love words. That's what we love. We love languages. That's the main cause that we're here. We want to talk.
I wonder, actually, from your perspective, sort of having been steeped in both cultures, what do you see as some of the differences that come out as there are similarities? I would love to hear some of those. And also, as you talk about sort of the different languages being connected to different parts of the cultures of each culture, and obviously cultures are complicated, and there's not just one culture. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, one of the most basic similarities that I see in both cultures is um, the experience of I don't know how to say it in English. Maybe Yochai can help me. Plitut, palit,
Like being a refugee.
being a refugee. Um, it's both in the Israeli and the Palestinians' perspective. They both see themselves as refugees, and they see themselves as victims of a crisis, a war crisis, different kind of crisis, and it's maybe it has to do something with the writings because recently I read a book about the first writing of the Arab nations, the scripts that was written in the Arab nations around Israel at the time that the Palestinian and the Israeli war started to happen, like in around 48. And it took a very long time till somebody from the Arab nations around Israel write about the Palestinian conflict. It took like 30 years. I think it took almost 30 years till somebody wrote about it. And the first writings are very similar to the writings. I found a very, very basic similarity of the writings of some of the writings in the Palestinian writings, the Arab nation around them, to the writing of Hanoch Levin. This experience of a refugee, of a person who got kicked from everywhere, and now is
Hanoch Levin, for those who don't know, I'll just say Hanoch Levin is the kind of like the most famous Israeli playwright. Yeah,
I think everybody should know that writer. He's one of the greatest ever written. He's the same size as Shakespeare and Chekhov. Is that kind of big in my perspective. And I found very basic similarity of, for instance, Hanoch Levin a lot of times writes about people, about the way things occur in the script are just people wait for years and nothing changes. That's Hanoch Levin. A lot of it's about people from the side of the society. He will never talk about the rich people. He will never talk about the businessmen living in Chicago or the businessmen living in the top tower of Tel Aviv. He will always write about the hooker, Nives, and Florentine looking for money to pay for the next drug. And the people, it's like sort of waiting. It's like very, very people that wait. And I read a script written in about 52 by a Palestinian writer that's talking about a car standing in a red light for 60 years. The couple got married in the car, brought a kid in the car, the kid got married, and now they're having a second family in the car while they're waiting for the light to change to green. So you see some similarities, the way they kept a more universal human thing. And when I found this kind of art pieces, that's things that takes my mind up, because when you move in a way, the Israeli and the Palestinian first demand for rights, each of them for his own reasons and good reasons, both of them. When you talk about art, eventually we're talking about two communities that talk about the experience of a refugee, and the differences between them. What I see is that the Israeli that live today in Israel are a little less, well, a lot less. They're more comfortable. I mean, they're starting to leave this refugee experience into the new global experience. Some sort of it's. I mean, of course, it's moving from experience of having now everything, having now the ability to take a car and drive to different cities, stay in hotel and drink in a coffee shop and buy a little thing over here, like some sort of new world here. So they're a little less comfortable, still holding the refugee experience, which they haven't left yet. And also the Palestinians that live in Israel are living in the same state of mind, only they're holding the refugee experience much harder because it's a part of their personality and they can't leave it because it's some sort of their essence to demand what they still demand. Am I making any sense?
You are making sense. And
Okay.
also from what I've seen of other interviews you've done, I love that, like, I asked a question about differences and you went straight to similarities. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess one of the big questions that I always have is just like, how is that for you to play somebody who's so morally ambiguous like that? So it's so, I mean, I don't know you as a violent person at all, and you have to play this character that does such a crazy shift as well from the beginning to end. It's really amazing. So how is that for you to play a terrorist? How do you create such a shift in a character?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. And what was the most what I was trying to make out of this character is, of course, the change. And but the change was written in the script. I mean, I saw him becoming more radical toward the end of the show. And what I had to do, I felt that what my work was to try to justify and try to make his shifting be some more maybe rational, some more maybe with reasons. I try to find reasons for the radical change that he's having toward the end of the show. It was a hell of a journey for me because it, as an actor, but I mean, when you're a scientist and you're working on, I mean, when you're a psychiatrist or something, or you learn about to analyze psychological thoughts or psychological things in a human being. As an actor, you have to be the experiment. You have to take it and try to think these thoughts about yourself, which is the hard part of an actor, and try to ask yourself, do I have the ability as a person, as me? Do I have the ability to become radical? What is it to be radical? What is it to seek for an instant change or for an instant revenge? For what cause? And am I willing to pay that cause? And Bashar's character in Fauda is willing to pay that cause, is willing to seek for revenge. I don't think I've ever chosen, maybe I will as a kid, which took me a while to figure out that I do have this part of me. But the first question that I was asking myself is, like I said, do I have it in my system? Do I have it in my DNA to be aggressive? Do I have it in my DNA to be impulsive? Impulsive, I do have it, I know it. But do I have it in my DNA to seek for revenge? And I answered myself, yes, I do have it. And everyone has it, I think. The ability to be destructive, the ability to seek for pain, to seek for hurting whatever caused you pain. And of course, it's politically. The thing about Fauda is it's very politically. In Israel, to do some sort of show is very politically complicated because you're talking about. By making that role, you're not just playing a role. You playing a role that represents a part of the society that looks on you and asks himself, "Is that guy's representing us right?" And I needed to get away from these thoughts because each time I turn to these thoughts, am I representing the Palestinian nation right while playing Bashar? And I decided that I do not represent anyone. I represent a person, and that becomes aggressive. That's seeking for revenge. And in order to do that, I needed to make his dreams fall apart in the beginning of the show. I needed to make him look like a dream kid who has only one dream. And his dream is to win, to be a winner, and that this complicated political, violent things that happen to him takes the dream away from him, as if you're pulling the ground from his feet. And while he's falling down, he's seeking for reasons. Why did it happen to him? Why did he lost everything?
I wanted to follow up on you talked a bit about sort of the political aspect of this series, Ala, and just I wanted to make your life a little harder here, because on the one hand, of course, Fauda is like a very political series. It deals with the conflict, and even I think there's a quote by Avi Sischarov himself, who's one of the two creators of the series, who calls this. He says actually that the TV show is not a political manifesto. And even though it's like such a political show, it seems that the heroes, both the Palestinians and the Israeli heroes of the TV show, they have very personal motivations. As you said yourself, you talked a little bit about Bashar. The motivation is more like, I had this dream of being a big boxer and it's been taken away from me. How do I cope with that personally in my life? And actually, like, ideology and patriotism or nationalism and all these different things don't really come into play. There's even this scene towards the end, sorry for the spoilers here anyway, but the Israeli crew is about to get the highest commendation of honor from the president of Israel, but they actually don't show anything of that ceremony. All they show them sort of sitting outside on the curb drinking arak, and not really caring about getting this, incredibly big award from the president, because they're, too cool to care about that kind of thing. And so my question is that, some people applaud Fauda for, being so even-handed and giving this even-handed portrayal of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and depicting players on either side of it, including Hamas. Others, they look at Fauda and they see it as basically kind of this anti-Arab, even racist Israeli propaganda tool that kind of glorifies the Israeli military, who is always seemingly achieving the impossible and always winning in the end, and kind of showing us a caricature of the Palestinians, in a way not unlike the Indians in the early Western movies. All the arrows of the Indians never hit, and one shot of the cowboy is always on the bullseye. And you see kind of the same effect in Fauda. So I was wondering if you had any of those feelings, or if you got any kind of feedback or pushback from people around you, or in general the public.
First of all, there are things that are true. In the third season, sometimes it looked too easy for the crew to get over some sort of a lot of Hamas people are are not able to be over few people with pistols. I understand that, and so of course it's script that can be changed and that can be improved in my perspective. But that's of course my as an actor and drama perspective. Um, it has
So
something to do. Look, it has something to do, of course, with there are like in each and every single drama, there is a hero that we're talking about his life, and there is an opponent that we're talking about his life in a different angle. Eventually, Fauda has and can do more work about trying to focus on a more specific way in the Palestinian characters. Um, but it's hard to say it in general because I felt when they did, I mean, me as an actor, when I did Fauda, I felt like they really, really want to focus on the specific specific events that happening to Bashar throughout the season. Um, but of course, with seasons, I think there will some of the parts. I mean, it's again, it's about the understanding of the other side, the understanding of the complicated part. I'm not saying it's. I mean, I can't lie and tell you.
maybe I'll put this a little differently because I feel like I'm putting you in a difficult spot here. I don't want you to force you to criticize the series or not, but more maybe broadly. I mean, as I think we said earlier, Fauda became incredibly popular and
Yeah,
obviously speaks to a very wide sort of common denominator. I would think it was the most watched TV show in Lebanon and has big viewer. It's on Netflix in the US and has viewerships in really all over the world. It's very popular in India and all kinds of different places. Um,
yeah,
and Fauda thrust you into the limelight, really. I mean, it,
yeah.
I'm wondering, like, maybe how that did that change your life? Was that, do you feel now more of an obligation to have a certain stance, to be more political, maybe, to use
No,
your
no. I mean, I think I'm really trying to focus. I mean, the political is always my work is political. I cannot say that it's not, but the my way of looking at it, I need to look at the drama. The politics is what people say about the characters afterwards. Political part, a political thing is not, I believe, still believe that it's not dramatic yet. Maybe my perspective will change in a year or two. I don't know. Right now, I still believe that political has nothing to do with the drama. That the drama basically eventually is based on the relationship between a character and his father, the relationship between a character and somebody who hurt him. And in the third season, Leo is some sort of untrustful father to Bashar. Bashar has nobody. He has only Leo. Leo is, is caught lying to him, and the pain that Bashar feels is a pain of like somebody. It's like a father who lied to his son. I mean, that's how I took it. That's how I should have taken it. And it's not about Leo being a Jewish Israeli or an IDF. It's about Leo lying to him and taking his dreams away. So, but it's a different. I mean, it's an interesting. Like we talked about, what would happen if they would have a Palestinian writer, and I'm wondering about it. I mean, it could change and make things better. Of course, I mean, it's not something that I mean. Fauda happened. Fauda succeeded in the whole world, in India, in Lebanon, in Jordan, and in Saudi Arabia. People love the show. People want to see the show because they want to see the conflict. They're interested in what's happening here. They have no other way but the news. They want a filter of drama to be able to look in it in the screen and see what's happening in Israel throughout some sort of filter of drama. That's what the whole world is looking for.
Can I
Um,
ask you, like, what is your hope? and maybe this might be calling to that other interview I saw where you said like the point at the end of the day is melting the borders, but like, what is your dream here in this place where all of you live with such close proximity to violence and conflict? Like, what's your dream for what eventually could happen?
That people will find a common ground and will decide that humans are more important and people are more important, and the life of the individual is more important than that maybe people need to give away a little bit of their freedom in order to find common ground for a way to make a living for both of the nationalities that live here, that come to the screen in Fauda. And it wouldn't happen without compromising or giving up a bit of the freedom. And of course, nobody wants to give away anything, especially not to the other side. But my hope and my dream, you asked me my dream. So my dream is that they will be able to find it. Yeah, that's my dream, I guess.
That's powerful. Thank you. Thank you so much for spending your time speaking with the community. And
כן, תודה רבה, אלה.
really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
כיף לראות אותך, אחי.
Thank you very much. כיף לראות אותך. Have a great day. Have a great day.
All right.
Oh, people can turn on your cameras again. We turned them off so that the video would play a little better, but please turn them on again.
Yeah. You know, watching that, it strikes me. There's always like something that one of the pitfalls, I think, of being a documentarian is that there's always this risk that you're going to impose your own story or the story that you want the person to be telling on them.
Uh-huh.
I listen to myself asking questions, and it's like I want Allah, for example, to be insulted that he only gets cast as a Muslim terrorist in most of what he does. But he doesn't see it that way, and it's my baggage, But he gives a different. He has a totally different perspective on it. It's interesting.
I know. And actually I had a similar thought early on as he said, like, look, my family is of course Palestinian, but in order to fit in Israel, I learned Hebrew. I'm so glad I learned Hebrew. I fell in love with the culture. This is my first language. I had to learn Arabic later on in my life.
When I met Allah, he was an actor in Be'er Sheva, mainly playing like Hanoch Levin in Israeli plays. And I was trying to study Arabic. I still am. It's like an ongoing thing. And I would ask him, like, how do you say this? How do you say that? And he's like, I don't know.
Right. And I heard that and I was like, oh, like you're a stranger to your own culture. But he doesn't appear to be like, that's my imposing my own, he's actually good.
Yeah. Totally.
I actually wondered that. So you know him better. Is he actually good? Or is there, sort of beneath the surface? As I was watching this with Rebecca Stevens, who's our director of strategy and design, you've gotten to know her through the process of creating this this night. But she just commented, like, it seems like he's had a lot of media training. And so we were wondering, like, is he sort of moderating some of what he's saying? And is there subtext that you might be able to bring above the surface?
Look, I'll say this since we're in this intimate group here. I don't think he's had a lot of media training. I think he was a little hesitant of criticizing Fauda. So I will criticize Fauda here just a little bit. Maybe you heard it in the question I asked Ala. I first of all, I'll say I think Fauda is a great series in terms of, the drama and the conflict. And I was drawn in and I binge watched it. Like I'm sure a lot of people here have binge watched it. And I was hooked. So it's a really good piece of TV. But as an Israeli with a political stance, etc., I had a hard time watching it because I felt that in a sense Fauda was like using the occupation. It was kind of like occupation porn, you could say. So it took the occupation as this great dramatic backdrop, and it was humanizing both sides. This is true, but it was humanizing the wrong people on both sides, right?
The fighters.
It was
right?
humanizing, exactly. It was humanizing the fighters of both sides, not the people striving to live a normal life and striving to find connections and have peace on both sides. And so I take issue with that a little bit. And also there's a lot of stereotypes that are strengthened and emphasized on both sides in that series. So those are the parts that were harder for me. And I tried to get Ala to criticize it. And he doesn't do that. I think part of it is because he understands that he wants a role in the next season and that kind of thing. But I know from conversations with him that he does feel like that also about some of these things.
One of the parts of the conversation that we had that didn't make it into this sort of shorter, distilled down cut was our conversation about like revenge and masculinity. So that was something that we had, our community had sort of hit on in our Facebook chat, was like, this show is driven by revenge and honor, and if somebody's cousin or brother gets killed, then there must be blood, or, and the same thing, if an Israeli dies, then like whoever caused that, like their house is going down, or, and it seems endless. First of all, it's like, and it feels very, that sort of, I passed on the language of, toxic masculinity. Is that a phrase that he's heard before? No, it's not a phrase he's heard before, but he said, that does resonate, because with, the amount of violence we're all sort of living with just beneath the surface, it brings out like those parts of you. It also brings out it brings out the worst, it brings out the best. And I wondered if you have your own answer to that question, both about the realisticness of what seems like a main driver in the show, which appears to be like honor and revenge and some sense of protecting, protecting one's people, protecting one's honor. How realistic that feels.
Well, I mean, there are two sides to that question. One is, like I mentioned before, that like sort of it almost feels like a past life where I was like an IDF officer. So wearing that hat for a second, the show feels very unrealistic. But that's kind of like a problem that I'm sure all like doctors have when they watch doctor shows, etc. So I'm putting that aside for a second. That of course it doesn't make sense that a small crew would survive what they survived in Gaza, and they wouldn't be sent like that to Gaza and all that stuff. Putting that aside, I do think that actually does hit on something that feels pretty accurate to me. It's sort of like very, let's be honest, Israel's a very machoistic society. There's definitely a lot of toxic masculinity in the air on all sides, and that actually I think is something that this series does well in terms of showing portraying Israeli society. Yeah.
We had one question. So I'm curious if people had questions as you were watching, that either about the conversation itself or like the conversation spurred something within you to, that you're curious about, that Yochai, as someone who is a documentarian of Israeli society, might have insight into. So, okay, it looks like people are beginning to put them into the chat here. So I'm just going to read.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, actually, you know what? Lisa and Teme, would you just go ahead and read your own questions so we can see and hear a voice that's not myself and Yochai? Just go ahead and read the very question you put in the chat.
I said, but in Israel, as I think it's also in the US, would anybody accept a story about the humanization of the other, like the normal people? You were talking about the humanization of the aggressors. Would anybody be interested in seeing a story of the normal others? Like,
well, I think a good answer to that is actually in Muna. Somebody here mentioned that he watches that series, and it's a sort of a spin-off of a movie that's made, that Ala also plays in, incidentally, and that's actually a portrayal of Arab Israelis living in Jaffa and trying to be like sort of, normal Tel Avivian hipsters and sort of what they go through and the different constraints and problems they encounter with that stripe. And I think in that respect, Muna is a really important TV series, especially for Israelis to watch, more than like a foreign audience or anything, because it shows like Arabs just trying to be regular citizens in a country, and it's not an easy thing to do in
I
Israel.
mean, I also don't know. I agree with you that obviously the focus of Fauda is on, this. What's the name of the unit? The
Mistarvim,
the
I
Mistarvim
forgot
unit.
yeah.
These are
Yeah.
mostly Arabic-speaking Israelis who can pass for Arabs, and so that's how they, sort of do their counterterrorism work. But their allegiance is to Israel. And then you have Hamas and Fatah terrorists, and and what I was going to say is like I think there is a portrayal of the people who are like not trying to live that life as the family members of all of the people the show focuses on. And what I found so heartbreaking watching the show was that like all of the family members and people in the orbits of the people doing this work are the casualties as
Yeah,
much as
collateral
the
damage.
guy. What?
Yeah, like collateral damage.
Yeah, like they may live, but their emotions, their relationships, like they are damaged and scarred, and and that like that also sort of perpetuates outward, further harm and further pain. For me, that was like another one of the big upshots was like nobody's winning here. There's nobody winning here. That was like one of my, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah. I found it heartbreaking. I found the show heartbreaking. That was I had to stop watching because it made me sad.
Mhm. Yeah.
Temi, do you want to ask your question here?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Muna. We saw it last year as part of the Chicago Festival of Israeli Cinema, and it was an absolute audience favorite. So I know about Mira Awad and I know about Sayed Kashua, but I was shocked to hear, did I understand there are no Palestinian writers?
Yeah. So you're right. I think this is a lot of my criticism stems from that. I'm sure if there were Palestinian writers in Fauda, I think they have script like advisors and such, but it's not written by, they don't have a Palestinian actual creators or writers of the show. And I think it shows. I highly recommend, if you guys haven't watched, I really, really, really recommend you guys all look for a series called Our Boys. It's another Israeli mini series on HBO. It's based on a true story, but it's like a fictionalization of a real story. And that show was co-written by Israeli and Palestinian creators and writers. And I think you'll if you guys have watched Fauda, you'll immediately notice the difference. But generally, yeah, what you're saying is true. I don't think there's a very big representation of Palestinian voices in writing rooms in Israeli TV, and I think Muna represents hopefully a beginning of a change in that. I'll say one more thing about this. It's very hard because I'm going to come from the Israel story point of view. We do not have an Arab on our staff. And this is something that we've wanted to do for years, literally for 6-7 years. And we've had stories we have many stories about Palestinians and Arab Israelis, etc. And also with collaboration with different Arab and Palestinian journalists. But we couldn't get anybody willing to come on staff with us because it's complicated for them or for all kinds of different reasons. And I promise you, we worked really, really hard on this because it's a very big aspiration of ours to not only represent people in our stories, but also to be representative in our staff and who is telling the stories. And it's just an incredible challenge. It's not easy.
Rebecca Stevens, do you want to voice the question you just put in the chat?
Sure. I was just appreciating what you were saying about the complexity, the sort of the way Fauda does not actually tell the most complex stories, and how the kind of sexy violence gets in the way of the kind of everydayness. And I was just thinking about Israel's story and how that's really sets out to be about everyday life and a huge amount of people. So I just wanted to know, like, given your critique of that, how do you approach Israel's story, both in terms of the big view of who you talk to and what you produce, but also in your actual human interactions as you interview or you get people together to be interviewed by other people?
Sure. So I'll give you an example for what we try not to do, and what we do try and look for in stories that, like, what we do. First of all, we actively look for stories not just of Palestinians, but of all kinds of different demographics that are harder to find, because naturally the stories that are easier to come by are stories of people in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. So we definitely try and leave that space and look for stories of Russian immigrants or Ethiopians, and of course Palestinians and Arab Israelis. And but what we try not to do is, for example, find a story of a Palestinian who is in conflict with with settlers about his olive trees or something like that. Because the reason we try not to bring those stories is not because those stories aren't important, but first of all, we feel those stories are already being told quite a lot. And we're trying to, like I said in the beginning, bring stories that you wouldn't hear anybody else. And secondly, because there's something about stories like that enforce the stereotype of the Palestinian as somebody who is, this poor person who is oppressed, et cetera, et cetera. And we're trying to sort of break that stereotype. So we'll try and bring a story about a Palestinian love story, for example, or something where the fact that this person is a Palestinian is almost incidental. All right, so kind of like I told you this in the beginning, I started with the story of this ultra-Orthodox woman who starts adopting Down syndrome babies. The fact that she's ultra-Orthodox is incidental. We didn't come to her because of that. We came to her because she had a great story. So in the same way, we would be looking for a Palestinian who just has a great story, regardless of who he is, what his identity is, and what his background is. And that's how we try to approach that.
Well, so, all right. So I have a question, because, one thing you asked of the show Fauda, and that you were sort of pushing on Ala was, okay, the writers of the show say this isn't our political manifesto, but in portraying certain stories and certain angles, it's sort of inherently going to reinforce, certain stereotypes, but also sort of, like make a certain political, lead you down political roads, because it's about, like, Fauda's about the occupation. It's about what that looks like on the ground for Israelis, for Palestinians. It's about how hard that is for everybody involved. But without the writers having an explicit angle, like they are writing the show to expose something for a purpose. They're saying, no, like, you make of it what you want. And so I know Israel's story also sort of explicitly in your mission, you're like, we're not trying to be political here. But I wonder if there is actually consciously, is there actually, something that you're trying to share that has political implications, even if you're sort of saying,
right. That's fair, because really, when you really, we like to say we're apolitical, and I think it's important for us to say that, because we're trying to build bridges essentially, and to create this space where people could come with an open mind. And one of the it's really magic, because when you tell human interest stories, when you tell a story about a person, it's really the most effective way it's like a bunker buster bomb, sorry for the militaristic metaphor here, through all of our preconceptions and our stereotypes. Because let's say you think one thing about Palestinians or about settlers, okay? And suddenly you're not hearing a story about settlers, you're hearing a story about Hodaya from Itamar. And it's just a specific person. It's hard to object to a person specifically. It's just their story. So that's sort of like that's our like official stance. But of course, you could make the claim, and I get it, that everything is political and nothing is apolitical. And in that sense, I think our politics is that, a person is a person is a person, and that people should be treated, equally and respectfully. And so in that sense, we're very political, so it's sort of like we're trying to, in Hebrew you say like to dance in both weddings. I don't know if that's a saying in English, but
I mean, yeah, I was always taught it was you can't dance at two weddings
right.
with tuchas.
Right. So we're trying to do that.
I hear that. No, I hear that. At the end of our conversation, Joe, I think he said the answer is yes. So Joe was asking, have you told human interest stories about that? Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, it's hard. It'll always be there in the background. You know what I mean? So it'll be like, even if you tell a love story of let's say a Palestinian with an amazing story that I remember that I did is about this Palestinian who wanted to be a dancer, and he from Ramallah. He wanted to be a dancer because he just saw this group of like modern dancers, and he was hooked. So he started going to the dance classes, but he lied for years. He would lie to his parents that he was going to soccer practice because his parents were like the top, military people in Ramallah, and they were like, our son's not going to be a modern dancer. Like that's not, and so that story, and it turned into a love story between him and this Ukrainian Jew who didn't really find herself in Israel. She made Aliyah, but she couldn't really find herself in Israel. And of course, that's one of the biggest taboos in Israeli society. Probably the biggest taboo is a relationship between a Jew and a Muslim. And we told that story. And so really the story was about each of their backgrounds and two people who couldn't really find their place in their respective societies, but found each other. It's not about the conflict, but the conflict is always there. So it comes through, but we don't address it directly in the story, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Well, and even as you're saying that, right, when you first said like the fact that somebody might be Palestinian is like incidental to the story. And my first thought was like, but in such a charged environment, like how could that be incidental? That really matters. But I think what I hear you saying is like very similar to what Ala was saying. A human being is a human being is a human being. And when we actually get to the stories of our lives, we relate. Like we relate to each other. It's not that like, so very often these, stereotypes and dichotomies, like Palestinians are, Israelis are, like this.
And I think that's part of the right. challenge of being a good storyteller. I feel is that you, on the one hand, you want to find these like out of this world, amazing stories that blow your mind, but they can't just stay out of this world. You have to also bring it down so that people can understand what they're going through. And I think all of us have gone through this experience of wanting to do something that our parents didn't want, or these kind of feelings are universal at the end of the day.
Or loving somebody that you weren't supposed to love.
Yeah.
All right, last question here. Woody, do you wanna offer your question? And this will be the last question, and then we'll sort of artfully wrap up. And as long as we're all together, we'll count the over.
Oh, well, I was curious about. Ala mentioned that part of his dream for the future was that I guess that people on either side would be willing to give up a little bit of freedom just so that people could be able to have normal lives, without violence. And I was wondering exactly what he meant by that. Because, like, is it just a matter of the land, or is it like is there something else that each side would want from the other in terms of like freedom? I thought it was a very I was surprised by the way that he phrased it.
I agree with you. It sort of seemed like there was stuff he wasn't saying while he was saying carefully what he did say. Yeah.
I think to me, the way I interpret it, it's not just about land. I think he was trying to, again, this is my interpretation here, but the way I understood it, also from other conversations I've had with Ala, is that, it's very easy to say, oh, kumbaya, let's all get along, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, there is a real conflict. And on one side, people feel expelled and discriminated. On the other side, people feel also similar feelings and all kinds of other feelings. So at the end of the day, there is a real conflict, and the only way to actually address this conflict is if people are willing to make compromises, and those compromises mean giving up certain things. I don't know if when he says freedoms, what he means only land. I'm sure land is part of it, but it also means, for example, giving up on the notion that you are absolutely right, which may be even more painful than giving up land in a certain way, and being willing to accept that that we're going to have to find a middle ground, and the middle ground will not be 100% of what any side wants. At the end of the day, there's no other way to create a coexistence than being willing to give up certain things that you hold very dear and close. There's this really beautiful quote, I think, by Yochai Maital about that. He's an Israeli poet, and he says, "B'makom shebo," I think I'm probably butchering this, about "B'makom shebo anashim tzodkim, shum davar lo tzomeach," something like that. So in the place where people are, in a place where everybody is right, nothing grows. Yeah. So I think that's my interpretation to what he's saying.
Powerful. Well, obviously we could continue Yochai and I have no problem continuing to talk, but we realize people have been here for an hour and 20 minutes, which is a long time to be on a thing. So I thought we could ritually close tonight. It's been 3 weeks since Pesach, amazingly crazy. For me, it feels like longer, but we're about to count 21 days. So I thought that would be a nice ritual close to the evening. And yes, definitely check out Israel's story. Do you want to say anything else, Yochai, about, sort of last?
No, I mean, I of course, I encourage everybody to listen to our podcast and to sign up to our feed. And if you do, we'd love to hear what you thought about the stories. And thank you for this opportunity. I love Mishkan. I've actually had the opportunity to come a few times. Pre-COVID days when we were touring, we would do shows in Chicago. And I hope we can do this in person very soon and be rid of all these Zoom events and masks, et cetera. But on the other hand, it's cool that we get this opportunity, and I'm very honored and happy to be here. Thank you. This was very interesting. Also, your questions were all very interesting and comments. So, toda rabba. I really feel like it went much deeper than usually these kind of things go.
Well, I mean, we've got 32 people here. I will say, my not so secret agenda is very similar, I think, to what you do, which is, you offered, we could do stories on whatever, we can, you could have brought any number of different stories. And I know for so many people in our community, for myself, the politics, we can't ignore it. We can't, sort of focus on the amazing accomplishments and achievements of the amazing state of Israel and not talk about the relationship between Israelis and Palestinians, or the lack of relationship between Israelis and Palestinians, or the, unbalanced and, painful relationship between Israelis and Palestinians. To me, that doesn't, I can't do it. And so that said, from where we sit, what are we supposed to do? We can learn, and hopefully we can learn about people, and we can get beneath the surface of the usual talking points of, the left versus right and pro versus anti, and actually talk about people's lives. And my hope would be that we are able to be more creative and open-hearted and supportive of whatever solutions there really may be, that we can be here for that, and we can be here for you, for Ala, for the person who sits in Ramallah, and be the Jews we've been waiting for. And so thank you for bringing this story.
Nothing to say, but
audience for it.
Amen.
You have an eager audience for it. All right. So, counting the Omer is just, we do it one night after the next, from Passover all the way to Shavuot for 49 days. today is going to be day 21. So how about this? I'm going to say the blessing, and you can say Amen, and then we'll count. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sfirat haomer. Hayom echad ve'esrim yom shehem shlosha shavuot laomer. Today is 21 days of the Omer, which means Shavuot is, I'm not good at math, whatever, it's next month sometime.
28 days to go.
A month. Thank you all so much for being here. Feel free to, I don't know if we can, if for those of you who are holding the muting and unmuting capabilities, let people go ahead and unmute to say hello, and yeah, go into gallery view just to say hello and goodbye as people are signing off. And say whatever you want to say.
Thank you. Shavua tov.
Shavua
Bye,
tov.
Shavua tov lekulam. Thank you very much for this.
Bye.
That's Ellie playing a drum.
Bye.
All right. People are just chill. That's okay.
Okay.
All right. In a moment, for people who have not yet signed off, we're going to send everybody out to the waiting room again. So thank you all. Good night. Oh, hi, Mimi and Gary. Hello.
Hi. Good night.
Hi, Mom and Dad.
Oh.
Hi. Great singing at the start.
Oh, thanks, Dad. All right.
It was an excellent program. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Mom.
Well, thanks
All right. Okay, we're going to close the room now. Lots of love. Woody, by the way, I had the same question as you. If you hadn't asked your question, that's what I was going to close with, so thank you. Yeah. Nice to see you, Carl. Hello. All right. We're signing off. Laila Tov. Bye.